This video is all about the Module 3 of English Language Testing and Assessment. The practice of language assessment. Building quality systems for language assessment. When we say that any product or a service is a good quality, we generally mean that it consistently lives up to, or is better than what we expect. For many people, a good quality car is safe and comfortable and always starts when you want it to. A good quality hotel has clean, quiet, and comfortable rooms with equipment that works well and staff who respond promptly and politely when we have a request. When thinking about buying new product or using a new service, people often want to find out something about its quality. They may read reviews on websites or in magazines, or ask their friends about it, or they may try using it for a short period to find out if they like it. The expectation people have of any service or product will depend partly on their needs. People look for different things in a hotel depending on whether they will stay there alone on a business trip one night or with their family on vacation for a week. Expectations are also affected by factors such as price. People don't expect 5-star luxury in a cheap hotel, and they don't expect a small cheap car to go very fast or to be as smooth and comfortable as a limousine. Different uses of language assessment are sometimes seen to be mutually incompatible. Tesdale and Langyong, 2000. Some commentators suggest that large-scale proficiency tests and classroom assessment should each be approached in a different way. The resources available in each setting, the kinds of information needed, and the application of the decisions that will be made are certainly quite different. On the other hand, assessment of all kinds are about obtaining good quality evidence of assesses, knowledge, skill, or abilities. The principles presented in this module are based on the practical advice offered in a range of language assessment textbooks and are intended to be relevant across the broad spectrum of language assessment contexts, putting quality into practice in language assessment. Task 3.1. If you were asked to prepare a language assessment to use in school, what would be your first step? What kinds of expertise do you think you would need? What step could you take to make sure you produce a good quality assessment? What factors might prevent your assessment from being as good as you would like? Putting quality into practice in language assessment. Task 3.1. If you were asked to prepare a language assessment to use in a school, what would be your first step? What kinds of expertise do you think you would need? What steps could you take to make sure you produce a good quality assessment? What factors might prevent your assessment from being as good as you would like? Projects to develop a new assessment, especially at the classroom or program level, are often seen by those involved as one of linear exercise with clear-cut beginning at the end points. It is decided that an assessment is needed. The content is settled on, procedures are sketched out, and the questions or items are written, often within a very tight schedule, or perhaps a test is bought from a publisher or other external organization. The assessment is administered to a group of learners. Scores are awarded. Decisions are taken and certificates are handed out. The work is complete. Sometimes an assessment is used once and then discarded. The next time everyone starts again from the beginning. Sometimes the same assessment is used again, unchanged, even when it has obvious shortcomings. The first of these choices is an obvious and impractical waste of resources, rather like buying a new car each time you need to travel somewhere. The second is irresponsible and potentially dangerous, like buying a new car, suspecting there is a serious problem with the brakes, but instead of taking it back to the dealer for investigation and repairs, ignoring the problem and continuing to drive around it. Poor quality assessment practices may not cause physical injuries, but they do produce misleading results and so can have damaging consequences, both for the assessors and for the people who use the results as a basis for decisions. Oham 2001 argued that in addition to the familiar problems of limited resources and lack of time, many teachers suffer from a lack of assessment literacy. They have not received training in basic assessment principles and do not understand how assessment and teaching can complement each other. Konyam 2009 cited a number of shortcomings in teacher-made language assessment that could result from this lack of assessment literacy. Tests made by the teachers are often too easy or too difficult for learners, fail to reflect what learners have achieved, and contain content that has not been taught or is not included on the syllabus. Effective assessments comes at a price. Not every institution has the resources to employ the full array of trained language assessment professionals listed by BAC 2009, including specialist assessment writers, psychometricians, or statisticians trained in the educational measurement, and graphic designers. Nonetheless, all institutions certainly do have the capacity to improve on their current practice. Fortunately, acknowledging a few basic principles can help to develop assessment literacy and improve the quality of practice. This principle can be summed up by the acronym PRICE: planning and reflection lead to improvement when supported by cooperation and informed by evidence. Planning should always be built into the development of any new product and assessment are no exception. The more throughout the plans, the better the assessment is likely to be. Reflection and review are fundamental to good quality systems. The effectiveness of plan and current materials and practice is fulfilling their purpose should constantly be questioned and evaluated. Improvement on current materials and practices is always possible and should be the constant aim of any assessment system. Reflection is directed towards making improvements. Cooperation and teamwork are essential to the development of good assessment materials and practices. Shared ideas and shared criticism aid reflection and inform improvement. Evidence is the basis for good decision making. Reflection based on a good evidence is much more constructive than prejudiced guesswork as means of improving quality. Effective recording keeping helps everyone involved to understand where procedures and materials could be made better. Systematic analysis informs effective improvement. Planning, reflection, and improvement. The first three FRIES principle, planning, reflection, and improvement, suggests a regular plan do review schedule in which current assessments are evaluated and ideas for improvements put forward for integration within the plans for the next time the assessment will be used. These principles do not only apply to locally developed material. Assessments that have worked well in one location with one group of learners may not work equally well in another. Material that is bought in from publishers or external agencies should be subject to the process of critical review as locally developed material. The checklist provided in the next three chapters are intended to help in this process. The last two of the FRIES principle, cooperation and evidence, are the conditions required to make planning, reflection, and improvement effective. Task 3.2. Have you been involved in preparing or administering a test? Were there any problem with the content of the test or with the administrative procedures? How did you identify these problems? Were any steps taken to fix the problems? How could you make sure the same problem would not happen again? Cooperation. One cause of poor assessment practices is mistaken belief that individual expertise or experience can guarantee quality. An experienced teacher is trusted to produce and carry out assessments in a better way than a novice, although this does not always mean that novices will be given any help with the job. An expert in assessment is assumed to produce better material than a teacher with no specialist training. This may seem reasonable, but even assessment materials produced by the most skilled, best-trained individuals have faults and idiosyncrasies. Where 1993 P19 stressed the point that developing assessment should be a group activity. Individual acting alone are very unlikely to be able to plan, design, and put into practice really effective assessment system. In fact, teamwork of various kinds is essential to good assessment. First, it is important at the planning stage to agree on a standard that the team will work towards. If individual teacher or testers each use very different approaches, either in creating assessments or in judging performance, learning can become a disjointed and confusing experience. Davidson and Lynch 2002 argued that good assessments are developed by consensus rather than by imposition. When people combine their efforts and everyone involved has a say in the development of an assessment system, there is a much better chance that it will be run successfully and that problem will be minimized if their teachers are able to work together to contribute to a shared collection or bank of assessment material. The system can become more efficient as well as more coherent and effective. The following chapters of this book suggest ways of organizing and coordinating this shared activity. Another aspect of cooperation is linked to reflection. The work of team members should be checked and repeatedly evaluated. A second opinion on assessment materials is always necessary, and having a third or fourth opinion is even better. Someone with a different point of view is often able to spot problems and errors that one writer or one scorer may miss. Wherever possible, classroom teachers should work with their colleagues in regularly reviewing their overall approach to assessment, the specific techniques and materials they intend to use, and the decisions they make when awarding scores. At the program level, enough resources must be made available to allow for regular review of all assessment materials and procedures. It should also be kept in mind that effective reflection and review needs a supportive and professional environment in which criticism is objective and is not taken to be personally malicious. As one teacher involved in developing assessments said of the experience of team, I learned to be open to and willing to accept groupmates' criticism. Primary school teacher from Hong Kong, tweeted by Konyang 2009 P22 233, willingness to accept sincere criticism is vital to good quality assessment system. Personal reflection. Have you ever been involved in making changes to a teaching or assessment system? Why was the change felt to be needed? Did you everyone affect support the change? What kinds of evidence were used to support or oppose the argument for change? Collecting evidence. A very widespread shortcoming in much assessment practice is, paradoxically, that the assessment itself often goes unexamined. It is surprisingly rare for assessment users to attempt in any systematic way to find out whether the decisions taken based on assessment results were the right decisions. Precautions may be taken to guard against obvious disasters. Questions that are all too difficult for the student, test papers getting lost or stolen, recording equipment breaking down. But a few people or institutions seriously try to answer the important questions of whether the assessment has really provided information that is as comprehensive and useful as it could be, and whether things might be done better next time. Where language learners really place into the most appropriate classes on the basis of a placement test, where insights from self-assessment used effectively to improve learning. Following a university entrance test, where the best suited people accepted onto the course, where new employees hired after taking a proficiency test really able to carry out their work in the foreign language. Adequate answers to questions like this will only be found in evidence is collected rigorously and systematically. However, in many educational systems, apart from score or grades, very little information of any kind is ever collected about assessments. In these circumstances, it is impossible to be confident that an assessment has provided relevant and adequate information about the assessors. Evidence is always important at the planning stage. In forming the initial design of an assessment, proficiency assessment should be planned on the basis of evidence about how assessors may need to use the language in the world beyond the test. In assessing achievement, evidence is needed about what learners have been studying. Developers will additionally need data on a wide range of practical issues, such as how long it takes to prepare and score the kinds of tasks envisaged, how many computer workstations can be made available for an assessment, and so on. As another vital source of evidence, every language assessment handbook insists that material must be tried out or drilled in some way, particularly if it is to be used in any high-stakes assessment, one that leads to decisions with serious consequences for the assessee. Without compromising the security of any confidential test material, assessors who are as similar as possible to those who will take the operational assessment, the one that will be used as a basis for decision making, are given tasks that are under development. Their responses to each question are recorded and scored, and the results are analyzed statistically to learn whether the material is really capable of providing the kinds of information it is designed to collect. Reports about the experience collection from test takers and those involved in administering the assessment can also help in identifying problems. Statistical analysis play a particularly important role in the practice of language assessment, particularly in support of formal testing. At least a basic understanding of statistics is needed to understand how tests are made and how results should be interpreted. A short overview of key techniques and their application can be found on the website that accompanies this book. Fuller treatments are to be found in Bachman 2004 and Brown 2005. During the initial development of an assessment, the focus is on the type of task that will be used. Does this task format work? Do the tasks elicit useful information about the assessors? The terms vary, but this trailing process is sometimes called piloting. Alderson et al. 1995 p. 74. Once the system is in operation, the focus is on fresh material that will go into new forms of the assessment. Are these particular questions good example of the established type? Do they provide the same kind of information as the prototype task? This drilling process is sometimes called pre-testing. Alderson et al. 1995 p. 74. In addition to the piloting of task types and pre-testing of new material, after each administration of an operational assessment, there should always be a process of reflection or item and assessment review so that lesson can be learned and improvements made. When intentions are not stated or understood, procedures not consistently followed, and evidence not carefully collected, it is impossible to tell just how good or bad an assessment has been at fulfilling its purpose, although experience suggests that the quality is likely to be very poor. If nobody explains just what the assessment is supposed to measure, it is impossible to judge whether or not it has been successful in measuring or capturing anything meaningful. If nobody keeps a record of the answer the assessors gave to each question, it becomes impossible to tell whether some of the questions are problematic if nobody provides guidance on which answer can be accepted and which are incorrect. When different people score an assessment, each one may judge the same answer differently. If nobody sets out how much time each assessee should be allowed or what sources of help they can use, some may unfairly be given more time or receive more help than others. In these circumstances, in the absence of standards for language assessment, the results may be meaningless and so cannot be useful. Practice will certainly need improvement. Without evidence, it will not be clear how they should be improved. The assessment cycle. When improvement is sought, assessment and assessment system should not be seen just as products. The assessment cycle. When improvement is sought, assessment and assessment system should not be seen just as products such as test papers or as events such as role plays or one-hour written examination or even a series of linked events that lead to a decision about the assessee. Instead, assessment should be viewed as continuous and repeating cycles of activities. The process does not end when a decision about an assessee is made, but can be modified and improved before the cycle begins again. The next time around, the quality of assessment will be better. Task 3.3. Stages in developing and implementing an assessment. Make a list of the activities such as preparing the assessment, taking the assessment, and etc. that might be involved in developing a language assessment system. What documents are used to guide or record each activity? Which people are involved in each activity? Are all of these activities essential? Which activities would be important in developing an assessment for use in the classroom? Compare your list with figure 3.1. Within the overall cycle, it is useful to identify a sequence of activities, each associated with a particular function or rule. Each rule may be carried out by a different person or group of people, and some may even be carried out automatically by machines. On the other hand, one person or group may carry out several rules in large scale. Assessment programs, each activity will involve detailed documentation so that different groups of individuals can coordinate their contributions. Teachers, especially if working more or less independently on classroom assessment, will not be able to keep such extensive records, but will need to consider efficient ways of keeping track and communicating the progress that their students are making in their learning. How will their approach has worked and how their assessment fit into an overall school program? Breaking down the cycle into the different stages involved can help them to do this. Figure 3.1 represents the different rules involved in the assessment cycle and the various documents used to record each stage. The rules and their associated documents are discussed in the paragraphs that follow. Stage 1 Designers Objectives and Specifications. As we saw in Module 1, and as Haggis 2003 P59 insisted, the essential first step in assessment is to make oneself perfectly clear about what it is one wants to know and for what purpose. Year 2010 compared the designer of an assessment to architect of a house. The architect begins with an understanding of the purpose of the building that he or she is going to design, considers among other things the location and the available budget, and turns this into plans for the construction of the building. The architect provides detailed drawings and instructions for the builders. These plans include the materials to be used, the precise layout of the rooms, and so on. Figure 3.1, the assessment cycle rules, responsibilities, and documentation. Just as the architect needs to know before beginning the design whether the building is intended as a family home or a shopping center, the designers of an assessment need to be clear about the decision or decisions. The assessment is intended to inform. Many assessment projects fail before they begin because too little attention is given to what the people who will use the results to make decisions. The assessment users really need to know about the assesses. Often at the outset, the users themselves may not be very clear about what kinds of information they really need. This reinforces the need for cooperation. The designers of the assessment will need to consult closely with the users and to be sure that they build a shared understanding of intended purpose. From the outset, as part of the planning process, it is necessary to decide who will be involved in each stage of delivery and administration and to take account of their views in developing the assessment. Architects do not, of course, begin from nothing. They can draw on centuries of human experience in constructing homes, offices, shops, and factories, and long-standing knowledge of traditional building materials and techniques. In making their plans, they can combine the established traditions with the innovations such as newly developed materials and new ideas for design. Similarly, good assessment designers will have an understanding of what they believe language ability or whatever else is being assessed consists of and how this is relevant to the context which the assessment will be used, the particular purpose and particular population of assess they have in mind. They will know how language abilities have been assessed by others in the past or how they are assessed in the other context. They will also be aware of the effects that the use of the different techniques available may have on those involved. The designers of formative classroom assessment systems need an understanding of how language are learned and how best to use information from an assessment to guide ongoing learning. The issue of what should be assessed or measured by language assessment, the assessment construct has naturally been the center of a great deal of debate between people who favor one approach or another. Part 3 will look at the impact that some of the different theories to defining contrast have had on language assessment design. Task 3.4. Should all teachers in a school base their grades or score on the same assessment? Why or when might it be important to give learners the same assessment? Why or when might it be important to have different assessment for different learners? As one means of ensuring a coherent system with consistent results, it is important that procedures followed in making a useful product or carrying out a project can be repeated. The steps in the process have to be recorded rigorously enough to make replication possible. This also helps in identifying the likely sources of any problems when they, according to the purpose and formality of the assessment, different aspects of the content and administration may need to be more or less strictly replicable. Large-scale tests are often standardized. Both the content of the test and the conditions for administration are carefully delineated and controlled so that each assessee will have the same test-taking experience. For reasons of security, the same question can be used every time a test is given to avoid these different forms. sets of assessment material that follow exactly the same design, but include different content are produced. These are intended to be similar enough to give comparable results when the assessment is given to different groups of people, different times, and in different places. Assessees who score 57% on Form A of a test should also score very close to 57% on Form B. If two forms include very different material and are administered under different conditions, the results will not be directly comparable. In many kinds of formative assessment, standardization is unnecessary and could be counterproductive, as teachers may wish to adjust procedures according to the needs of their students nonetheless. Some degree of replication is important even for informal classroom questioning and self-assessment. The successful use of formative assessment depends on embedding regular procedures in the classroom. Teachers need to have a consistent approach to questioning and feedback so that students become familiar with the techniques and understand how to benefit from them. Learners need to be trained to follow set processes if they are going to be effective at self and peer assessment. The descriptive reporting of results needs to be carried out consistently so that users can develop a clear understanding of their meaning. Specifications. The key document that communicates standards and guides how an assessment is to be produced, administered, and replicated is known as the specification. The specification set out the plan for collecting observable evidence that will inform judgment about how knowledge, skill, or abilities a learner has, connecting theoretical understanding of language with the decision that the users will make about the assessees. A specification typically includes three elements: a design statement, an assessment blueprint, and task specification. The design statement. When considering the design of a new assessment or of an approach to assessment with a school curriculum, it is important to those involved to begin by considering, discussing, and collectively answering some fundamental questions. The purpose of the assessment, what decisions needs to be taken, who should take the decision, what effects will decision have on the assessees and on others. Who will be involved in developing the assessment in addition to the decision maker, and assesses who else has an interest or stake in the assessment. How will their views be taken into account? Who will take the assessment? Who will be the assessors? If some assessors have special requirements, e.g., deep learning speaking test, particularly sighted student taking a test or reading skills, how will this be met? How will any adaptations affect the decision? What aspect of language and which curriculum objectives are relevant to the decision? How are these aspects of how much information about the assessor's knowledge, skill, or abilities will be needed to support the decision? Is an assessment the only way to obtain relevant information? What other sources might to be used? Is another suitable assessment already available? Is an assessment the most efficient way to obtain the relevant information? Could other sources be used to supplement the assessment? In classroom assessment, should the focus be on the whole class or on groups or student peers of students individuals? Will all students be assessed or only a subset? What is the best way to report the results so that they are as helpful as possible to users? What effects is the implication of the assessment intended to have on teaching and learning? What unintended negative effects might it have, and what will be done to prevent this? Large-scale assessment programs will document the assessment to questions such as this in the form of what Bachman and Palmer 2010 p. 143 called a design assessment, and Fulcher and Davidson 2009 p. 123 called a statement of test purpose The design statement usually comes at the beginning of the specification and sets out the designer's understanding of the large-scale assessment. Programs will document the answer to questions such as this in the form of what Bachman and Palmer 2010 143 called a design statement, and Folger and Davidson 2009 P123 called a statement of test purpose. The design statement usually comes at the beginning of the specification and sets out the designer's and the decision to be made. All holders affected by the decision and individual responsible for making the decisions. Butcher and Davidson 2009 P 270, it provides a definition of the assessment construct, a description of the assesses, and an explanation of why the approach adopted by the designer is appropriate. Of the assessment construct, a description of the assesses, and an explanation of why the approach adopted by the designer is appropriate. Classroom teachers will not need to publish a design statement for each assessment they use in class, but they will nonetheless need to have a clear understanding of the theoretical justification for the content. What theories of language and proficiency underpin the test and why the test is the way it is. Alderson et al. 1995 p. 10. And this is as true for other forms of assessment as it is for tests. Within teaching programs, an explicit statement of the overall approach to assessment and its relationship to learning should be included among the key curriculum documents. Blueprints. Just as builders need detailed plans or blueprints in order to construct a building, so those involved in preparing an assessment need more than a design statement if they are going to produce material that matches what the designer intended. Assessment blueprints include clear statement about what content is to be covered, what methods are to be used, how many papers or sections there are, how long the test takes, and so on. Alderson et al. 1995 p. 10. The website that accompanies this book, fuller treatments are to be found in Bachman 2004 and Brown 2005. That's all, and thank you.